What?
Do they know I'm black?
No. Should they?
It seems like something you might wanna, mention.
Mom and Dad, my black boyfriend will be coming up this weekend, and I just don't want you to be shocked that he's a black man.
You said I was the first black guy you ever dated.
Yeah, so what?
Yeah, so it's just uncharted territory for I don't want to get chased off the lawn with a shotgun.
You're not going to.
You have landed on The Substance, a podcast aiming at being biblical, thoughtful, and human. Join us each week as we engage the culture without the culture war. I'm your host, Trevor Aiken, joined by my friends, my co-hosts, my podcast buddies, Vincent Edwards.
Howdy, howdy.
And Philip Marinello.
Hey, everybody.
And then special guest joining us this week, really excited to talk about Get Out, the movie this week, is Eugene Park. Welcome, Eugene.
Hey, good to be with everyone.
Eugene, I've seen you before on Twitter and a couple times on the Gospel Coalition. Listeners may recognize you. You wrote the main Gospel Coalition review for Minari that we mentioned when we covered that film with Brett McCracken.
Brett's a good friend. I'm a pastor out here in the Bay Area. I'm an associate pastor of a church it's literally a stone's throw away from Stanford University. So it's an interesting mix of people. And yeah, I write on the side. I consume a lot, probably too much culture. But I'm excited to talk about everything with you and especially Get Out.
On the culture consumption side, that's one of the things that attracted me to you. I've read a number of your pieces and was going through. I didn't get to do as much research. Sometimes I don't do any, but I usually try to be prepared. But earlier today, I went through your Gospel Coalition archive and saw that I'd forgotten that you wrote it, but I remember now going back and reading them. You wrote a number of pieces about hip hop and film for the Gospel Coalition. So I was like, I knew I liked this guy.
Nice.
It's good to hear that because sometimes I get in trouble when I write about that stuff. But yeah, I grew up in a suburb in California. It was, I guess, to be frank, like very white. So I was very confused growing up as an Asian American. And all I would do is watch anime and listen to hip hop in my home growing up. And then I became a pastor and I thought those things were bad. But then people like Brett McCracken made me realize, wait, there's some good in that and some redeemable qualities. So yeah, I'm a huge J. Cole and Chance the Rapper fan.
Boom.
Yes. And more of a like lowbrow, like I'm not highbrow. Like Brett is very highbrow. Like he really likes Terrence Malick. And I'm just like, Brett, like I can't. It's just not my vibe. But everything for the common man, I consume a lot of. I'm also a huge NBA fan, so a huge Warriors fan. So
I see a lot of that on your social media, and that all misses me. I can tell when the jokes are good and funny, and I do chuckle, but I don't understand them actually.
Yeah, I feel bad because if you just saw my Twitter feed, you'd be like, oh, it's just some random NBA fan, but I'm a pastor here and there. So
yeah, nice work.
Before we get into the movie, at the top, we want to give a spoiler warning.
Yep.
This is a film from, 4 or 5 years ago? 2017. If you haven't seen it yet and you care about that sort of thing, go ahead, check it out, rent it from your library, rent it off Vudu, iTunes, Amazon, whatever. We're going to have a link in the show notes for you. But just be forewarned, we can't really talk about this movie without getting into it. So if you haven't seen it and care about it, go check it out. If not, let's get into it. So, Trev, we had all seen this film before. Vince, you've definitely seen this movie before, right?
Yeah, so I watched it again yesterday, and
nice.
It will be my, I think, 5th time watching it.
Hey,
4th or 5th time.
Bro.
Yeah,
I'm somewhere in there as well. I'd say 5 or 6 probably as well. So, Trev, you got to watch it last night for the first time.
Yes.
Before we kind of
I am the resident first-time film viewer on The Substance.
That's kind of a fun. I think most of the movies we've watched have been your first time, other than Interstellar, right?
Yeah, I think so. Other than Interstellar.
Very well. So, what were your initial thoughts here before we kind of get into some of this?
Yeah, like my first thought was this film seems like it came out later than 2017, but I really enjoyed the overall just realness of the portrayals. It felt, I don't know, convicting almost in ways too. It made me think about like myself and like the position that I was in and the scheme of the movie. And before we get into all that, we wanted to do a brief plot synopsis, but
yeah, just going to give a little background information. Like we said, it came out 2017, written and directed by Jordan Peele, his debut film. Like,
wow,
this was the first movie he wrote and directed.
Man,
yeah.
A lot of people know him from Key and Peele and Mad TV, or funny little bit parts in movies here and there. But he originally wanted to be a writer and a director, and kind of got very successful at comedy, and then decided, hey, I need to actually do this. And this was his first swing, which was pretty incredible.
I was like thinking about it last night. I think this is like one of the best directorial debuts I've ever seen. Because, you know, people like, who directed Memento? I'm totally blanking
Chris
out
Nolan.
right now. Yeah, that was kind of like a low, like people look back and like, wow, that was great. But I think Jordan's like one of the dudes that kind of just came out and with the debut just kind of took everyone by storm.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of interesting to see that like you don't really see that happen a lot these days. But
right.
Yeah, as far as modern debut films, this is I think an argument can absolutely be made that this is top 2 or 3, if not the top, as far as modern films.
Yeah.
One of the things that I knew it made a ton of money. This movie was made for $4.5 million, and its initial run grossed over 250.
Hot dang.
Ooh.
Nice.
Dude was working on a shoestring and just did his thing.
That's Bitcoin numbers, man.
And actually, one of the records I saw that it had is, as far as an original script, I still think it's the number 1 initial theatrical run of all time now.
Wow.
So, we need more original ideas. That's something that we talk about on the Substance a lot. Like, part of what I love so much about this, and Trevor kind of said it too, like, was its originality and its realness. Like, he is an artist that didn't get a ton of money. I mean, it's a lot of money in our minds, but industry speaking, $4.5 million is half of an advertising budget for other movies. Like, got a couple of bucks, made an incredible film.
Yeah. And speaking of originality too, just thinking about that subject, because I feel like we've really entered a new era of movie production.
Sure.
Everything is very serialized. And you think about like TV, comics, and books and other media have been in that realm for a while. But with the kind of Marvel takeover, I feel like a lot of people feel like, well, there's no original ideas because everything is like sequels and reruns and remakes of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think what really is happening is, instead of that, like, they're really trying to, I think serialization has become popular. People like to live in a universe and see the story like evolve and that kind of stuff. And so I don't know. I've just been thinking about that a lot recently. But yeah, in this vein, for this movie, a very timely expose of, honestly, I just felt like race in America.
Yeah.
I don't know. It was a great way to expose the different ways racism works in a lot of different forms.
Well, and that was exactly the goal, to make, Jordan Peele has said on the record many times, the idea was to make a horror movie about race. And that's why he said he was working on the movie for about a decade. He said, like, nobody's ever going to pay me to make a movie about race. That, spoilers again, the finale is a black man killing a rich white family inside their home, and the audience is cheering. Like, nobody's going to pay for that movie. And thankfully, because of his comedic career, and like you said, the time's changing some, and him being able to work on a budget, he was able to make it.
Yeah. So for those who are not really worried about having spoilers, Eugene, give the audience kind of a synopsis of what Get Out was about.
Man, black man meets white girlfriend, suspects the family to be racist, but it's worse because they're literally body snatchers, which doesn't make sense. As if you're hearing this, you just got to watch it. But basically, they visit on a family visit, and it's just weird. And we'll get into this probably, but weird vibes. And Jordan Peele does such a good job of not giving it away if you watch it the first time. Yeah. But if you rewatch it, you're like, yo, this guy's a freaking genius. But
a lot of foreshadowing.
Many foreshadows, so many layers. And the way that even, I forgot that Allison's character's name, the actress. Rose. Like, even her character, I think, embodies so much of what we see in America today. But basically, the parents run a auction that kind of mirrors slave auctions, where they developed a way to take someone's brain out and put someone's brain in, and you control their body while this part of you lives in the sunken place, which again we'll probably get into. And the beauty of this movie is at the end, it's finally a main character in a horror movie that doesn't make stupid decisions, right? And he comes out victorious. So that probably, if you haven't watched it, you're probably like, what is this guy smoking? But just watch it for the first time, and you'll be thoroughly, no matter where you are on a political spectrum or even a horror fan or not, you'll be thoroughly enjoying this film.
Yeah. I mean, as far as genre, I think in a way it definitely does fit into a lot of the tropes of horror. And again, Jordan Peele has said this before, and I think it makes a lot of sense to kind of look at it as more of like a socially conscious thriller. And I know I've said this before about other things because I'm a big fan of film. It's one of my favorite genres really is like, or one of my favorite types of film rather, is strong genre films that have a point, that have a message. He uses the tropes and the archetypes of horror and thriller. And I mean, if you're a movie fan, you can see some pretty obvious homages and references to other things that we know as movie fans or as horror fans. If you're a big horror fan, I'm not a huge horror fan, but I like the good ones, and those are a lot of the ones that he references. So I kind of caught a lot of what he was doing, but it wasn't just to build jump scares, and it wasn't just for mood or to like seem edgy. He was really getting at some uncomfortable truths that when you leave the film and you're on a text chain or you're talking together, watching a film that does it well, you can have conversations that you couldn't just sit down with your friends and be like, hey, let's talk about the racism in America and kind of how it's structurally perpetuated and doesn't necessarily need like individual hate to keep it running. That's just kind of an awkward conversation starter. But if you're like, well, how did racism work in the movie? It's art that has value.
Yeah. That's one of the, I actually was able to see it in the theater. I remember near the end when TSA rolls up and
yes,
and the tension in the theater was so thick. It was like, I don't think, like, you always hear, a seat moving or somebody eating something. Like you hear noises, kind of almost like white noise in the theater sometimes. It's not bothersome. But it was so quiet.
Yeah.
That's one of the most tense scenes in the movie. We're skipping to the end here. So all the climax has already happened. Rose isn't dead, but she's shot and injured. And Chris, the protagonist, is standing over her. And police lights come, which typically in a horror movie, if you're a victim and police show up, that's a good thing. But because of all of what has transpired before, as an audience member, if you're seeing that for the first time, you're like, oh no.
Right,
like,
exactly.
This is done.
This is not good.
You're the only one that survived.
Super guilty.
Everybody else is dead.
At that moment, yeah.
Like as soon as the lights came on, like he put his hands up, and if you're watching that, your heart sinks.
Yeah. And that's one of the ones where it was like the tension was able to break when he gave like that joke. He was like, how'd you find me? He was like, I'm the TSA. And everybody just started laughing, and it was like such a release because it was like, whew, that was getting heavy. And so I think that also points to a bit of the genius that Jordan Peele had of like, I think he knew this was going to build up. And then there's going to be a moment where we need to kind of relieve that pressure a bit.
Lil Rel crushes it.
Yeah, he did a great job. That was awesome.
There's not like jokes or gags, but there's a lot of really natural, just really high quality tension and comic relief.
I think he's on record for like, he ad-libbed most of his dialogue. And just like Jordan was like, amazing. I mean, he knows Lil Ray, like, just go for it. And I think he has the best line. Like his conversation with Rose on the phone, that's like one of my favorite dialogues in the movie. It's just like, man, this is so good. It's just natural. But yeah, he's
it's
so
probably one of the most vulgar parts of the movie. But I just laughed so hard the other day when I watched it and that was also an improv when he just goes off on the Jeffrey Dahmer bit when he's just kind of theorizing about what the white family is actually trying to do to him. And he steals the show. And Lil Rel, if you hear this, come talk to us. We'd love to talk to you.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, I think that reversal at the end, it really also brings into stark relief after it being a comic relief and a tension relief in the film. You also start thinking like, okay, the cops showed up, and my immediate thought was, "Oh no!"
Yeah.
But then they were there to save the day. Like, but shouldn't my feeling have been, "Oh yay!" when they show up? And so the reversal of the film kind of presents and brings to the fore a tension that exists in reality, and like really highlights it.
No, I to add on, like I think that's one of the most beautiful things about Jordan Peele, because it doesn't matter, I think, if you were black or white or Asian or whatever in the movie theater. Once those sirens showed up, you were like, no matter what your political leaning was, you were like, oh damn. Because I remember I was in the movie theater, and when the police lights came on, someone in the back yelled, "Oh hell no!" Right? And I don't think they were black, and I was like, oh, he did such a good job of making you understand this is like how we feel when we see the sirens all the time. And it's not forced. It wasn't like...
He puts you into Chris. He makes you see things from his perspective.
The alternate ending was like... I don't know if you guys have watched that, but that was like...
Whoa, what?
Yeah, the alternate ending is that it was the cops, and it did not go well.
Yeah. And the last scene is him in jail talking to Rod. And I remember he says, "It's at least I stopped them." And that's the end of the movie. And I was like, man... That's actually probably more realistic, but I'm thankful he didn't use that, because I think that would have just killed all the momentum going.
It would have, And I was thinking about this earlier because I saw Us first, and so like Us also has a non-tragic horror ending. Sorry, spoilers for Us. And then so I was like kind of expecting that, like maybe in this movie, like at the very end, like maybe it does all come together. Like I wasn't sure, but I was really happy when it did. I don't know, it just feels better.
I think it was definitely the right, and I'm not one to give Jordan Peele notes, but I think in the screenwriting direction, I think that was definitely the better way to go, and not just purely for the crowd pleasing nature of it, but for what the movie is and what he was trying to do. His goal, while looking at reality, like you can see that he's hopeful in a way. There's a lot of ugly realities. There's a lot of things he wants to shine lights on, but I think the film ultimately is hopeful.
Yeah.
I want to flip from end to beginning really quick before we jump into characters.
Get back on.
Like that opening scene with the character walking through the kind of white, he calls it like a hedge maze neighborhood. How like
Shining reference.
Talk about how that sets up the tension of the movie.
I mean, shout out to Lakeith Stanfield. He's like one of my favorite actors. Like he's hilarious too in real life. Like he's probably crazier in real life in a good way. But, you know, even that intro scene is, because usually horror movies, it kind of eases you into that. But I think one thing I really appreciate about Jordan Peele is just from the, like, kind of like Scream, like, it's just kind of like, bam.
Get right into it, yeah.
And it's kind of like, look, this is a reality. You know, one thing about even taking a huge step back, like, I don't know, I remember I read this somewhere, but it was like, man, Jordan Peele perfected true horror. Because the modern horror movies you see today, they're not a real danger. They're just something you watch to get scared of while you're in the movie theaters. But with Get Out and even Us too, there's like this lingering sense of like, oh man, like this is actually real life.
The world's not right.
Exactly. And that's why I really liked how he started off with that. Because it's like, dude, this isn't a perfect linear story. Like this is often what happens in real life. But I thought, man, that scene into, if you guys remember, like it's these forest trees and there's this Swahili song in the background. That's the transition. And then it transitions into Redbone from
Childish Gambino.
And I was like, man, and I did more research, and the Swahili song is kind of like, it's telling the listener, run, brother. I think that's kind of like the translation.
Wow.
And then the first song is like that weird run, bunny run, or you know, that kind of creepy one.
Yeah, in the car.
Yeah. And then Redbone's kind of like the modern, you know, stay woke, like, hey, watch what yourself get into. I was like, man, he was such a genius with those three opening scenes that, like, as you just rewatch him more and more, you're just kind of like, what an intro to this movie.
And I think whether you're a big film fan or not, the intro is also very effective because other than one zoom out cut at the end, it's all in one take, and that was because of budgetary reasons. He'd filmed a super elaborate opening that was more showy, and then he's like, this doesn't work, so he had to go back and get it. He's like, we're just gonna do a oneer with Lakeith walking up, and like the camera organically turned around, and then he was abducted, and then there's like one cut to the trunk, and then that's the whole thing. Like you're in it from the beginning, and the technique is so subtle. And again, super shocking for a first timer. It's very, very, very impressive.
And I think what it does to, sorry, just real quick, is it sets up for the viewer, no matter, like Eugene keeps saying, like no matter what side of the spectrum you're on, but this man's in danger in a white space. Like as a black man, he's in danger in a white space. And like, it's not preachy about that necessarily. It just is.
Right. Exactly. So, for the individual that doesn't really live out that experience daily, it really kind of personifies, it brings others who don't experience what that tension and fear is, brings them in to participate in like what you're feeling is felt by individuals when there is no camera. And then it's even a tension that I've felt. I've been walking and I've walked past the state line into a suburb, and I'll try to walk as close to the edge of the corner of the street, and I'll try to make sure I'm not messing with your mailbox and my hands are not in my pocket. I'm trying to have the proper body language to show that, I'm not a threat. I try to keep my hoods off and all of that good stuff, because it's just so many cases of this could go south so quickly, and Get Out kind of personifies that in like it sure did.
It's like the least preachiest movie about racism I've ever watched and enjoyed, because it doesn't force, like, Vince mentioned, it doesn't force it down your throat. It just makes you live it even from the start. And I think that's one of the biggest beauties of Jordan Peele. Even in Us, I don't want to get too much into Us too, but even that, it kind of, I guess spoiler alert, but in the beginning, you're kind of, I feel for the protagonist and their family. But at the end, you're kind of like, what's going on? Like, I don't know who's who's good, who's bad. Like, and I think Us is a much bigger idea of like social class and wealth, but he's just such a good job of getting you to feel, hey, look, you might not agree with what's going on, but let me at least tell you how I feel, and make you feel that through this narrative experience.
Yeah.
There's so much to talk about in this movie. We could probably do like a couple part series on it, but I'd love to hear what your guys, some standout performances or scenes, like what stuck with you from the movie, whether it's Trevor, who just saw it the other night for the first time, or those of us that have seen it a number of times.
So the thing that stuck out for me was Rose. I'll tell you too, like my immediate reaction when I saw the film was ending, but even before credits rolled, I'm like, I need to see this again. Like I need to watch this again, was like immediately what I thought. And Rose was a big reason, because you trust Rose. You trust Rose from the beginning.
Does a good job of that.
And there's a lot of reasons I want to explore that some too. But like Chris trusts Rose, you the viewer, you trust Rose. Like you don't trust anyone else in the entire show outside of Chris. Obviously, he's the main character, but you trust Rose. And I know the phrase gaslighting gets thrown around a lot nowadays, and it's kind of like probably a new term to some people, but like that idea of constantly changing surroundings and saying things are what they aren't, so that the person believes lies, is deceived into thinking that they're the crazy one or they're wrong or that kind of thing. And she almost exemplifies that in such a perfect way, because she does it in a way that, like, looking back, you realize that's what's going on, but in the moment you totally just trust her. I don't know what you guys like thoughts about Rose. I would love to we could almost spend an entire hour talking about Rose, but we could pick it.
We could do each character for a patron special there. I don't want to step all over everybody. I know I probably talked too much. I think you mentioned gaslighting, Trevor. I think because I've probably watched it 4 or 5 times already before I rewatched it recently. I think part of what makes the deflections of suspicion so effective is that, I don't know if gaslighting is the right word, because in 3 key scenes, she is the one saying the truth. She is the one pointing out the racism. She is the one pointing out the awkward behavior, pointing out the problem. So you're like, well, she sees it and she's trying to protect him.
She's coming to his defense. Yeah, like she's, for lack of a better term, real quick, there's 3 different layers of characters in the film. There's Rose, who's like, I don't know, I don't have a better term for it, but like woke. There's Rose who gets it, who gets the systemic injustice, who's all the way there. There's like her parents, which are kind of white racial progressive, but like still don't really get it. Like that kind of category. And then there's like just the low key and not so low key, just out and out like casual racist. That's kind of the 3 layers. Like that's like all the friends who show up to the family party are kind of that 3rd category. The family's kind of in that 2nd category, but Rose kind of, you're like, okay, like she gets it.
Yeah,
Rose
she's
is in there, and like when it's turned out that like even her getting it is just a tactic to exploit black bodies, literally. That's just
100%.
like dadgum.
There's, as Jay-Z put, there's levels to this, man.
Yeah. No, dude, when you rewatch it, I can't wait to hear some of your thoughts, because you just from a structure, from a story standpoint, in those couple of scenes in particular, if Chris's character was the one pointing out all these things and she was like, oh, like if she was trying to pacify him, then you'd be like, no, this is clearly bad. Why is she pacifying him? But because she's the one calling all these things out, and the movie goes at such a good pace. It's like 1:40. Not a moment is wasted. It's super economical. So you're just like, Chris is our guy. She's on his side. She's good. Yep. Like, and whenever suspicion, like even at the end, right before the final reveal, when it's clearly revealed that she is a part of this system and tradition of abducting and enslaving black bodies, you're like, okay, she's a part of it. But then you're like, well, is she hypnotized? Like,
you
see that, you're still kind of like,
that's why I use the term gaslighting, because at the end she's fiddling with the keys. You still trust her.
You're hoping, you're like, give him the keys. Let's go.
Yeah,
like,
I remember that tension. Like,
she's abducted 8 people already, at least. Like, after you've seen that, for sure, you know she's been a part of 8 abductions already. You're like, is she doing this volitionally? Is she like?
And then and then once again, just like at the end of the movie, like we said, then you question, why did I ever trust her?
Right. Because then it's like it's on full display at that point.
And that's why he won the best screenplay in 2017.
Oh, but she should have won an Oscar for her performance too. Like, once it's like flipped, that one scene where she's looking up top NCAA athletes.
Like, for her next victim.
Yeah, and the milk with the straw with the Fruit Loops, and it's like, yo, this girl's insane.
Like she pulls that off for sure.
Yeah. And I was just like, man, she did such a good job. Like, one scene about her in the lake, when you rewatch it, she's the one that says like, oh, let's leave, Chris. And you're like, oh, she's an ally, right?
Yeah.
Like, and then it's like, no, she was so manipulative that and I think Jordan Peele knew too, like if he made her like, no, let's stay, people would be like, yo, that's kind of weird. Yeah. But the fact that she's that manipulative to be like, hey, I'll be the one kind of incepting, let's go, because you think I'm on your side. But in the end of the day, like, allies, I think it's even a deeper meaning that like allyship is so commercialized these days. Yeah. That term. And, even in my church, I have a lot of people saying, oh man, I want to be allies, especially with the past year of everything going on. And I'm like, man, like, I guess not to get too pastoral, but like this movie at least did a good job of like, man, allyship's not enough. Like it can be so fake so many times. Like, yeah, maybe you're not as manipulative as Rose, but all because you think you're woke, it doesn't mean that you understand what's actually going on.
Yeah.
Right. And when you already hold all the cards, it doesn't matter. Like she's like, yeah, let's leave. But the trap's already set at that point.
Right.
And so.
And he was caught because she'd already done the teacup thing. Like the final deal was already, like the tripwire was already in his head.
Yeah. The overall theme that really stuck out to me in each scene was kind of just this idea of the ability to have, in a sense, cognitive dissonance. Because it's like, oh, I'd vote, Obama in a 3rd term, and all of this rhetoric of how supportive they are of Black people and of this, this particular interracial relationship, when in fact they can say those things, but at the same time literally sold a person. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's like that distance from reality or action and words was kind of just profound all throughout the movie, because it's like, how can you say that there's love or respect in this regard, but then, create a system where you basically, like you said, body swap people. It's just like you have to, there's a level of distance you have to have for a particular individual to want to put them in captivity. Because it's not like you're like, oh, well, just take my brain and take my body And because if you want to live again, and if it's all about just making sure that you continue life, then, when you're ready, you just take me and I'm young. You know what I mean? It's not, you have to see a lesser value in a person or group of people in order to be able to kind of create that kind of scheme.
Well, yeah, this is kind of speculative, but I mean, like, they could have had their own kids and had like families that just sacrifice one of their kids if certain people get to live.
Yeah.
But because of, like you said, they were valued less.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to have all of us talk, but I'd love to hear your thoughts, Eugene, on how the film challenges particularly popular white definitions of racism, because there was no hate tradition. Like, there was no, the things that that many may initially think of, the images of racism that come to mind.
Yeah.
That wasn't what was happening in the movie.
Yeah. With that being said, like, one of the, as I rewatched it like way too many times, and like, and this, this, actually, when I watched it yesterday, it was the first time I rewatched it post COVID, and I was like, man, if this movie dropped like right now, just think about the impact now, because it like I think someone mentioned, like, it seems like it was made like a month ago,
Yeah.
And I think one of the biggest, there's a lot of themes that, as I rewatched that stuck with me. One of the themes that stuck with me is he does such a good job of presenting Imago Dei in a broken sense, that, like, man, they only viewed black bodies. They celebrated black people and ultimately want to take them over because of just the features that they provided, not as a whole human being, but like that. The Tiger Woods scene always sticks with me. Like, can I see your form real quick? I love Tiger.
Let me see if I want to be inside your body. Do you have a good enough?
Yeah. And it's such even a bigger play of like, okay, who are the black celebrities that have been accepted into the mainstream? It's like, well, you got to do something special. Tiger, like, you got to have a special athletic ability, right? Or like, you got to show yourself in some sort of way to be accepted into this, like, holy grail of celebrity.
That's
and
good.
I thought that really stuck with me, that like Jordan Peele understood, probably, I don't think he's Christian, but he understood, like, a human being is much more than just what you offer physically, right? Or even socially, right? Like, black is in. I remember that one grandpa was saying that too.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh man. And that's such a good understanding of Imago Dei, that like, the thing is, the reason why these people have values, because they're created in a holy image of God, and that's something different. And I thought he did such a good job of exposing that throughout the whole film.
Yeah, just to dovetail off of that, how he depicted the acceptance of black people in white spaces. And so that was one of them. He talks about the artist, and I think you brought that out that in a great way, in a way that was kind of fresh to me just now. But the other thing was just the fact that when Chris encounters these other black people and expects to find someone who gets him, somebody who's with the culture and things like that, he continually finds, for the lack of a better term, like, white people in black bodies.
Yeah, because the three people he connects with.
Literally, that's what it is, right? Like, that's what you find out at the end. But I felt like that was a huge metaphor also for often the bar for entry of black folks in white spaces, like the church, like the conservative Christian church. Honestly, just to speak frankly, that a lot of times to like really be fully accepted in that family and really be fully allowed to be your full self, like, you're not. You have to be the white accepted, culturally conformed version in ways. And like, they do that. Like, they take the soul of this person out and replace it with these different values. And there's this scene where the dad says, like, oh man, I love all other cultures. Like, he's talking about, he's showing like he's got these little things that he brought back from Bali. Trophies, and I thought that was great foreshadowing, because that's it. Like, it literally is like, he likes it in as much as cultural appropriation, but to really be in his space means that you have to be in full like white conformity. And I just thought, man, like, oh, what a better, like, I don't know a better metaphor of that, the whole thing, than just literally what they did in the film.
Yeah.
Well, and literally what the sunken place is, and we haven't even dove directly into that yet, is the suppression and silencing of, for better word, like, you know, like the blackness of these characters, like who they are, like the silencing and suppression of like who, like their essence, like they're a vessel.
I mean, like, if I could add anything really quick, I think Trev mentioned how like this is parallel to evangelical spaces, and like as a pastor and as an Asian American pastor, I probably don't relate enough as an African American pastor, someone in ministry, but I totally feel that my group of pastors, like within my Asian American circles, we use "get out" so many times to describe how we feel, like when I'm at TGC, the national conference, because it's just and man, I don't know if Jamar Tisby's like Leaving Loud series. I don't know if you guys have listened to that.
Yeah, we've
but that's just basically a church version of Get Out. Like, and you can disagree or agree with his premise and his beliefs, but his description was so similar to Get Out. It was like, I tried to be myself, and I was silenced. I was in the sunken place, and I just said, I'm not going to do that anymore. And you could disagree with that, but I was like, man, that is Get Out, and that's something Jordan Peele got. Like, white evangelical spaces for minority voices in any context, but even the evangelical context. Right. The sunken place is real, man. Yeah. You guys probably feel that too.
Yeah. I mean, for sure. So that kind of goes. The thing that stuck out to me the most on my most recent viewing is probably the most stretch of a character as far as like the pulpy genre was Stephen Root's character, Hudson, the art dealer. One could say, like, what occurred to me was, okay, on the racism spectrum, he's blind, and he genuinely, like, he knew Chris's work and appreciated him before this. So, like, you could kind of say
he's literally
he
colorblind.
Was the least he's colorblind, he's blind, but like on the spectrum, like he's kind of the least racist person. Like personally, he doesn't hate Chris. He thinks he's incredible. He's jealous of Chris's eye for talent. Like he said, he submitted a bunch of photos to National Geographic, and he just realized that it wasn't his gift, and he wants the gift that Chris has. So like, he also kind of does the most despicable thing of like, he chooses to buy him and inhabit him. Like he sees him as a commodity. So like just the self-deception and the blindness. And when Chris is sitting there before he goes in the operating room, he says, well, why black people? Like just straight up, like the movie kind of has a meta moment of like, why black people? It's like, well, it's different from different people.
Yeah, he kind of says it wasn't about them being black, right? Like we talked about this a little bit earlier, but like the whole like racism without racist thing. It's all black people who are targeted, but it's like even the guy who's buying the black man is like, oh, it's not about you being black. I just wanted your eye.
But why was he able to? But because of the systems.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't about Stephen Root's character was this hateful KKK member or whatever. He's like, you're a commodity, and I want you, and I can have you in the system. That's shocking, but it's also like, you're like, okay, look at society, look at economics, look at criminal justice, look at healthcare, look at all these things, and you're like, well,
yeah, and Rose is the same thing.
It's so good. It's so good.
And it really does show how if you have to, at some point, you have to compromise. Because even if that character, like you said, Phil, was the least racist, he's being, in a metaphor, he's being handed something that's not is valued improperly on the plate of racism or white supremacy, however you want to categorize
to take that for himself.
And so even if you're like, I'm not racist, I love black people or love all people, and it's like you can make that, but if you seek to benefit or have benefited from that plate that's being handed to you, you have to at that point make a decision. Do I say that this person has a true higher value? If so, I throw the plate away. I don't take I'm not taking what's being handed to me. But if you do accept it, then at some point you have to then just compromise and say, well, maybe I am a little, because I don't see you the same. I see you more as, like you said, a commodity and something to be used and taken over. But no hard feelings kind of thing. So you have to make that compromise at some point.
Well, and how about Daniel Kaluuya's performance? There were two moments where it was kind of the exact same reality that he was depicting, and the lights at the end was like a big gut punch, but going back on it this time, I think it hit me even harder. the scene where Rose with the keys, where she doesn't give him the keys, and then when he's talking to Stephen Root's character on the TV, like his kind of immediate acceptance, because he's like, this is the way the world is. When Rose is like, I can't give you the keys, he's like, okay, yeah, that's what happens in the world. Yeah. Like he just accepts it like right away. He's like, this is how the world works. Like I am at a disadvantage, and the guy on the TV is like, man, you're one of the better ones. Like you understand how this works. Like you go along really well with this. It's like, do you have any questions? He's like, no, I get it, man. Like,
and like that struck me right now too. Like, why does he accept it? I don't know if it's related, but when I watched it yesterday, my most favorite scene in Get Out is the ending, because it's just like, yeah, what in the world is happening? And I loved it because it's like he's making smart decisions and like, whatever it may be. But the scene that really stood out when I rewatched it was the sunken place scene, the first one where he gets into it. And there's a lot of metaphors there too. But one of the things that I realized watching back is like, man, Jordan Peele's talking a lot about trauma and how, okay, how did they even get him into this sunken place? It was almost in a way, like, again, common term, gaslighting his trauma to get into that place and kind of trap him there, right? That to use his mom's death in this way where he's vulnerable and like rethink his own trauma and make himself feel guilty to kind of get in. And again, this is just Jordan Peele's observation and you can take it for what it is. But I thought like, man, why do people accept that system so, surely now today of minorities, but especially like African Americans, is I think trauma has also been used to like gaslight them to like think, well, this is just how it's meant to be, right? Like, and
we've
MLK
had people tell
everything.
us that, like, well, they're just like, that's what the argument boils down to when they're like, well, look at the crime statistics, look at their education level, like they bring this on themselves.
Exactly,
is what is sometimes not said, sometimes actually said. But you have trauma. What do you think that is? What do you think you have had that trauma? And the insinuation is like, you've done something to deserve that. How many times do we talk about this, Trev and Vince? It's about the systems. These systems were set up sinfully and wickedly and in an immense violation of the Imago Dei and in God's justice.
Yeah.
But then we're like, well, we kind of stopped doing the very, very bad things, sort of. Isn't everything better? And it's like, no. There's all that trauma now that we're saying, okay, exploited community, like why did you get yourselves into that situation?
Well, yeah, and two, I just realized that whole framing is she's actually there to help. She actually is supposedly like, oh, you have this problem, I'm gonna fix it for you.
She's like literally like the white savior exemplified in Jordan Peele's personification. So
yeah, so many freaking layers to this. I think about, I've thought, just coming back to Rose, I keep coming back to Rose because I think, like I said at the beginning, like Rose is kind of a convicting character for me because I think about what does she get out of it,
That's a really good question.
Yeah, that is.
I think she, like, her unquestioned participation in the system is very, I know it's a movie, but like, why does she do that?
But, one thing that I rewatched and I realized too is that scene when she's sitting down and the Fruity Loops and because she's a Fruity Loop,
the deconstructed cereal.
Yeah. But in the back, which she just put up after that, was all the picture frames,
all of the pictures.
Right?
Yes.
Yep. And I remember she mentioned Crit, like, oh, you're my favorite, right? And it's almost like, well, what's in it for her? It's like, well, maybe it was like the experience, of like being black, right? Or like being that friend for the black people, right?
Yes.
What
does that say about allyship? Right.
Exactly. Like I think that's, and again, like that he made this in 2017 is still like, is he a prophet of some sort of like a secular prophet? Because it's like, it speaks so much to the themes now, but like so again, tying to my hip hop like themes, like one of my favorite songs from J. Cole, I don't know how many of hip hop fans are here too, but 1985, you might know this, Vince. In 1985, he mentions his biggest beef with like these young rappers like Tekashi 69 or these just like hooligans that don't really rap, but they're just like let's take ecstasy and just get hookers or whatever it may be. It's like, you think like this is what white boys growing up think is black now because of people like you, right? And as long as I can bob my head to this music as a white boy, like this, J. Cole's understanding is, oh, that's what it means to be black.
Yep.
And I kind of get that sense from Rose now that I rewatched it. Like, what's in it for her? It was like, oh, I got to experience these friendships and
black
romances
culture.
Black, exactly, right? It's like, I got black friends. We all have people like, I'm not racist because I have a black friend, right? Or my sister-in-law twice removed is black, and it's just like, like there is something to that Rose personifies.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about it as you asked the question, and my mind goes down more of a sinister road of like the benefit or the excitement of being able to lure these black individuals to get them all the way to the point of conversion. It could be a point of like intrinsic benefit because it's like I got that one to trust me. I got that one to submit to, my prowess and my kind of, seduction or whatever. And because it's never through, I don't think any of them were through just regular friendships. Like we're just comrades. Every single one of them usually entered into a relationship with her. And so there just might have been a more intrinsic kind of like, I got the juice, I got the sauce, like I can get them in, I can reel them in. And just that intrinsic benefit, which is, like I said, is more sinister of being the ability to get them in.
Yeah. Well, which like Eugene was saying, I don't want to, obviously this was not the author's intent in Jordan Peele, but I think you can definitely draw some parallels to, the conservative evangelical church that we have come from, that it's like, we need to get more black people here, but it's not,
it's a commodity.
If they ever stay,
exactly,
they're not like, it's, we want you physically here, but we want you to be just like us. Like that's very sunken place. Like, I don't know.
Sure.
Yes, that's it.
No, like evangelical spaces, and it's not just black people, and I think Asians have felt this a little bit in the white spaces too, that like we're so seen as commodities on the ministerial level at times. Like the cool thing, I don't want to get in trouble, but the cool things these days I feel like is for these megachurches to add Asian pastors to their staff. And it's like, let's make them do announcements or whatever. And, because I know friends that are kind of in the system and they
show
feel
them off a little bit.
It's like, they're putting them in these campuses that have high Asian populations. And it's just like I get it. I do. And it's like, there's a part of it that I want to believe is pure, but another part of it's like, man, I'm not a commodity. Like I'm a human being too. Right. And I feel that too. So sorry, I cut someone off too.
No, that's good. I was actually just wanting to connect through with what you're saying there, with what you're saying too about J. Cole's 1985 lyric, and some things that I've heard. Like I think I heard it on a King Los freestyle on like a Sway in the Morning clip or something like that. But he was talking about the things that enslave and like entertainment being one of them. And I think Rose represents that in some way. She's the lure that, folks like J. Cole and people are telling people to watch out for. As long as you're willing to follow this system of pure entertainment and degrading and that kind of stuff, like there's an entry into success in the white world, but it's at the cost of exploitation for minorities. And like, I think Rose represents that. She's in it because of whatever thrills that she gets in what Paul would probably call the passion of her flesh.
Oh yeah, because she's romantically involved with most of them, all the men.
Right. And so, but at the same time, she kind of represents this temptation that lures into this space. And the title of the film gives you the action. Get out.
Yeah.
Man, you touched on something that like my friend, I have another podcast we talk about all the time with, especially in Asian American ministry, is the allure of like when you made it in the white spaces, that's when you made it. And I like, at least I totally feel that. And like it's even, one thing that we've been talking about is like for Asian American conferences that we often host, it's always like, oh, we got to bring in a white, we don't say this, but we got to bring in a white speaker. Like why? It's like we got to look legit. And I think these days people are kind of catching themselves like, well, what does it mean to even be legit? And why does it have to be a white speaker implicitly? Right. So I totally agree that like, man, there is that, temptation of Rose for a lot of minorities to think, oh, once I've made it in these spaces, I've made it. But it's like, man, but are you really in the sunken place maybe? Right. As Jordan Peele would say. So I totally feel that.
Yeah. Because I mean, his radar is there wouldn't be a movie if he never went to the house. But it's like, why did he go there? Like Rod's sex slave crazy theories were like just wrong enough to kind of be able to be laughed off, but he was like 80% right.
Right. Exactly.
Rod was the voice of wisdom in this whole movie, right? And it's like, dude, but even the scene when he's in the cops in the police headquarters, and you're like, oh,
with all the minority detectives, because you're like,
the black detective is going to come in and save the day, but it's also this bigger narrative of like they just laugh him off. It's like
they're part of the systems.
It's like that's come on, man. Like that's too ridiculous to believe. And oftentimes that's probably what a lot of critics feel with law enforcement too, that they're so entrenched in their own systems that they can't see, like, it seems ridiculous to you because you're in it and we understand, but this is also the reality that a lot of minorities and especially black males are facing on a daily basis.
Well, and also the psychology is interesting. I know the time is going so fast here. The psychology of Chris and the lure that Rose has over him when Chris feels like he recognizes Lakeith Stanfield's character, and he takes a picture of him, and for a moment he breaks the hypnosis, and then the titular line is shouted. He's yelling, "Get out, get out!" And you can tell that there is danger. Like Chris has seen a lot of subtle bits of danger and strangeness, and this isn't safe, and things are very, very strange. But he literally has a black guy in front of him yelling, "Get out, get out, get out," and he doesn't. Why doesn't he do that?
Yeah, and it's asking that question, like, why did it take so much before it got to the climactic point where he's like, "Get your stuff, we gotta go, we gotta go, we gotta go," and you seek to suspend your disbelief in the radical because they've already curated this environment where they're seeking to make Chris safe. And so that's where all the rhetoric comes from. Like you mentioned, Trevor, about the tropes and here's the things, and I love other people's cultures and Obama and hey, this is just, going on and all of this kind of stuff. And so they create an environment where you feel safe. And so because of that, it's like, yeah, you might say something real weird or awkward, but, that's just, white people, they still gotta, these are older white people as well. Yeah.
He's at least when he's doing all the my mans, like at least he's trying to relate to me.
Yeah, he's trying, he's making an effort. And so it's just like you seek to just push it back and just keep pushing it back. Like it's not bad, nothing's really going on. And then the only 3 black people that are around are like, the statistics for that of running into 3 socially awkward black people is not that high. So you should find somebody is like, what's up, brother? What's up, sister?
When he goes for the pound and Lakeith grabs his hand.
Yes. And so I think that's probably why it wasn't
this so weird.
Yeah, and I think that's probably why he didn't immediately leave, is because I know personally I've gone through that wrestle of just like, I can't blame everything on racism. I can't blame everything on somebody hating me because I'm black, or I'm feeling uncomfortable. Maybe it's because of me rather than them. And you kind of internally wrestle.
Yeah, because it's not even about the hate. Right. That's not even what racism is. All you dummies defining racism terribly.
And so I think that's probably what it is. It's just you have to keep pushing it off because, like you said, Eugene, if you're in this space and you make it in the space, you've made it. And then you already got the relationship with your girl Rose, and you're just trying to continue to suspend kind of just that idea that anything's worse than it actually is.
Yeah, totally agree. And as you were saying too, like kind of related, but even stepping back from like race, we're talking about systems and evangelical spaces, and I think I've been listening to the Rise and Fall of Marcel. I'm sure you guys have too.
Yeah. See where we are.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And again, not to spoil that, but the most recent episode, there's this line that really strikes me where it's like Mark Driscoll's church before these guys came were like copying these Hollywood movies for the sermon series, right? Like Superman would be part of that. And it's like, hey, you can't follow the culture. You got to create culture. And, that it's kind of a story of how it went wrong. But, as we're talking about systems, I think even in the evangelical spaces, like I find that to be so true, even past race and all that. But like there's this culture that is just mimic, copy, and serialized, like Marvel-esque in the evangelical spaces, if that makes sense, right? And one thing I really appreciate about Get Out is everything we talked about, but just that it's different. Like it took risks, and like Donald Glover recently tweeted how like in Hollywood there's no more experimentation because there's fear of failure. Like you don't want to be denied a budget or like a script from a big company, so everyone kind of does what just gets by. And I think that's so true in the church, right? Like even past the racial structures that we see, that the reason why all this exists oftentimes is that white evangelical culture has become so thick, and that we're too scared to take chances as churches and as pastors and as Christians too, that we just, hey, like we're gonna read this article and share it, and that's great. Like that's it's just rinse and repeat. And I loved Get Out because it was just different, and I think the church has something to learn from that too. You know, like, you know, and doing it in a biblical orthodox manner, but like, what can we learn, right, to break these systems? Because as we mentioned, it's thick, and we have to kind of be afraid to fail and to be rejected to kind of create a culture that can redeem itself, I think, during this time.
When we just replicate the cookie cutters, there was a time evil was instituted, and it was baked in. If you don't change things, like you said, if you don't shake things up, if you just do things the way we did them, then like there can't be progress, right?
Yeah.
No, I totally agree.
No, that's good, dude. I'm loving all of this, and like I know we are out of time. I had 2 more things I would love to hit.
Hit it.
I really only have time for one. I am going to state them both, though, for one for posterity, and then we'll actually dive into the other one. So the one that we'll state for posterity is just the observation that the way he gets out is he burns it all down. That's the only, like, that's literally the only way. And like, once again, we could talk an hour about that. But instead of going down that road, what I would love to go down is kind of also just dovetailing off of what Eugene was just talking about, was like, what does this mean for the church? Because I think just meditating again, I come back to allyship with Rose and false allyship. And we've been talking about that in relationship to race, but I want to talk about that in relationship to Christ. Because a lot of us, when we think about the Christian life, we're allies of Christ in his life and his ministry and things like that, in a way that, and this is not to be Jesus Juki, but literally we use Jesus. We kind of come to Jesus for entrance into a certain life, or entrance into a social status, or entrance to a certain state of mind. And Jesus' life, like the famous line we keep quoting from A Hidden Life, Christ's life is a demand. And just like allyship, true allyship requires sacrifice, requires putting yourself on the line, requires putting yourself in discomfort, requires putting somebody else's needs first, requires taking up your cross in ways. And I think that's a reflection, true, like the fact that we don't get that, Eugene, in the church, is I think somewhat of the fact that we don't actually get the Christian life as well. That like Christ requires sacrifice, that Christ requires that we pick up our cross, that Christ required, like being a Christian means that you're going to have to give something up and live in an uncomfortable space in some way. Why? Because you can't follow Christ and the systems that this world rewards, because it requires that you compromise for that in some way. And what that compromise looks like is different for everybody. We can't just say, oh, well, that person's compromising because they have money or they have success or they have whatever. But the reality is the life lived for Christ will, and the scriptures talk about this all over the place, will require sacrifice. And so it's got to cost you. And that's the thing for Rose. It never costs her. It never costs her to be an ally. And I think, you know, for a lot of folks who have, you know, pledged allegiance in a way to Christ, it's never cost them.
Well, yeah, I think that is a good parallel. One could say maybe Rose liked her idea of what Black people were and Black culture was, for what she could get out of it. And it can be a temptation in the faith community to seek your Christ, like the hidden life, like seek the comfortable Christ, and not seek Christ in his actual own image. Like if you make Jesus in your own image, and you're like, the Jesus I'm going to follow is the one that I make and I'm comfortable with, and doesn't require sacrifice of me, that that just only fulfills me and doesn't require anything of me, like that's a temptation. You see, I mean, you see why that's so powerful, because I mean, it's you get eternity and require nothing.
Yeah, and I think it is it's not a Jesus juke, because advocacy for minorities and justice in the world, like we've said on this podcast a ton, is a spiritual issue. It reflects on what you think about Christ.
Yeah. Like as you're saying that, on the flip side, like I think this movie is very easy, like, hey, conservatives should watch this. But I think even like the woke side of Christianity should watch this.
Yeah.
Because it's like,
that's what I'm saying.
Like even at, my church, a lot of millennial and Gen Z Christians these days, like they're posting stuff about race that like they don't really probably know what they're posting about. And it's just like, oh, it's everyone's posting and I want to be woke and be an ally, so I got to post this, right? And I've found that, like we mentioned, like allyship's kind of, it's almost a critique of allyship, Rose, I think, right, as we mentioned. And man, as Christians, as Trev mentioned, it goes beyond on a vertical level. But to go back to the horizontal level, I want to kind of get rid of that language within the church. Not that I can, but it's like we're called to be more than an ally. We're called to be like brothers and sisters, and that's much deeper than an ally. An ally is a very easy out, and I get really kind of like cringy when I hear people like, "Oh, I want to be an ally for these people." Like, dude, as a Christian, you're called to be way more than just post a couple times on Instagram and take a march around San Francisco and feel better about yourself. Like, are you praying about these issues? Like, are you okay? You're posting Black Lives Matter, but if I'm honest, are you praying Black Lives Matter? Like, wow, because it's a struggle for me too, right? And I think it's such a good watch because it critiques everything, not just the racist, white people. The understanding is like the whole system from top to bottom is complicit on all levels. So,
thank you, Jordan Peele.
Wow, totally good word. That's a good word, Eugene. Appreciate it.
One of the things before we wrap up with you here with our time, we have a segment towards the end called Substance Shoutouts. So we just like to open it up, especially when we have guests, to hear what have you been enjoying in culture? What have you been enjoying or edified by, like films, books, articles, podcasts? Like, what have you consumed that you found value in, whether it's just personal enjoyment or some sort of challenge or edification?
Oh man, good question.
You can give us a couple if you want.
Yeah, I have like 2 kids that are 3 and 2, so like I consume more like ping pong.
There you go.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
I'm with you.
That's a mood, man. Yeah.
If you're a parent, Blippy kind of freaks me out. I don't know if that's redeemable, but if you're a parent, you understand what I'm talking about.
I haven't quite got there yet.
Yeah. But anyways, like, okay, this is like easy, but J. Cole's off-season album, it is explicit language, but I really enjoyed it. I'm really excited for Kanye's Donda to drop, hopefully this week, but
one day.
It's Kanye.
Eventually,
so if we get it, it's a blessing in itself. I'm excited to see where that goes musically. On the entertainment side, I watched something recently. I have been wanting to get into Ted Lasso. I haven't yet.
So good.
Yeah, I keep hearing like that's the one thing that I feel like is uniting Christian Twitter. So like it has to be good.
It's so good.
Okay, I'll watch that. I need
uniting the whole world. I don't know a single person who doesn't like Ted Lasso.
Yeah, but to watch that, and then outside that, I just finished Jesus and John Wayne by Kristen Kobe's Dume. I actually had her on for I have a small podcast called Off The Pulpit, and man, that was a really good book. I'm complementarian. I don't want to get too theological, so there's some differences.
This is a place if you want to.
No, you can jump in.
Safe space.
Cool. So like and when I had her on, like I had some theological differences, obviously, but she did just such a good job of laying out like the history of white evangelicalism and masculinity, which kind of ties into Get Out. And man, it was just a really eye-opening experience, especially as a minority that's kind of in this white evangelical world, to kind of figure out like, oh, why are these things kind of weird to me? It's like, oh, it's because it's more cultural than biblical. So that's a really good read, and I'd recommend anyone to read that. So,
can we link your episode with her? That sounds awesome.
I mean, I don't know when this will drop, but that episode, Chris, will probably drop next week. But I'll for sure link up, and we'll
put that in the show notes.
Let's do it
for sure.
Somebody didn't mention the podcast at the top of the show.
No,
just jumped right in.
No worries. Small podcast called Off The Pulpit. So yeah.
Off the Pulpit. Check that out. Where else can folks find you online, Eugene?
I'm on Twitter, but I just it's mainly NBA stuff. So I don't.
So if you're a basketball fan, give him a follow.
I don't tweet about the church because it's just too toxic on there. So I just stick to the NBA, which is even more toxic, but it's more fun. So I'll do that. So I'm on Twitter. I'm at Euge the Dad. Outside of that, you can find me on Instagram too, and I'll post some more random stuff on my stories there. So that's about it.
There you go.
Dude. Nice.
Man, I really appreciate you agreeing to join on the podcast and have a good convo about Get Out, man. What a great recommendation.
I love having thoughtful Christians who enjoy. I mean, Brett McCracken is a delight to talk to about. I'm the cinephile of the group, but my tastes are far and wide. I love the high cinema, but I'm a huge genre fan as well. So
yeah. I'm trying to mold myself to be the lowbrow Brett McCracken of the Christian world. So Marvel and all that stuff, I'll come at you. But honestly, guys, I'm really thankful to be here, and I really appreciate what you guys are doing. I hope more people come on and listen because I think this is great what you're doing for the church.
Thanks, brother.
We appreciate it.
That's really encouraging. Well, guys, that was Eugene Park. What a great conversation. Joining us for Get Out. Great movie.
Who would have thought a horror film about racism could stimulate so much profitable discussion and thoughtful, edifying biblical meditations there?
100%.
I mean,
it's so relevant still.
Yeah. And that's what we do here, man. Those biblical meditations, right, Phil?
That was a great conversation. Wanted to check in on our 21 in 21 campaign. We just had another addition to it recently, so we're creeping towards our goal. Remember, that is 21 supporters at $5 a month or higher. We're creeping up. We got our website coming up.
I'm really excited about the website drop. Vince has been doing some amazing work on that. Shout out to Vince.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. I'm super excited.
I got no skills in that realm, so all you.
Me either. And shout out to all the listeners in the 21 campaign support.
Yeah, everyone who hits us up in the anchor link is where you can do it at the monthly rate. And if monthly is not working in your budget, hit us up on Cash App at $ the Substance Pod. We're very independent. Every dollar counts, and we're going to keep doing this. But we have been talking about some bonuses if we can. So if you like what we do here, throw a little bit in. That's how this works with content creation nowadays. So we appreciate everyone who does that with us.
Yeah, and with the creation of the website, we're going to localize a lot of our social media links, emails, and our substance shout outs and all of that. But until that gets released, go ahead and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at The Substance Pod. That's where you're going to get all of our information, giveaways, guests, and please engage with us in the comment section. Also, take a listen and follow on YouTube. We have all of our content there as well as curated playlists. So engage with us on social media.
And still follow us after we have the website too.
Yeah. And still also hit us up on our email, which will probably be very convenient forms and links to be able to do. But in the time till then, you can just send it to thesubstancepod@gmail.com.
Yeah, let us know what you thought of the movie and what we should add to our list to talk about in the future. We got several, but we're kind of like, we need to add some more movies to this list.
Yeah, we do love film recommendations, so hit us up with that. And then if you have like testimonials or thoughts or ways that we challenged your thinking, or you were encouraged, or you were pumping your fists in agreement, whatever, you can actually leave us a voice note with all that kind of stuff at 913-703-3883. So thanks so much for joining us. We're really looking forward to seeing you in the future, maybe even next week.
On The Substance. That's me. I was like, I was waiting for the prompt, and I was like, Trevor's going to say On The Substance, and it's like, no, that's me. Vince says peace. I was doing Vince's part in my head.
Peace.
And that's what we do here, man. Those biblical meditations, right, Phil?
Okay, 1 second. Hold on.
Sell the people, Philip.
You're beating me over the head with that segue. Okay. I'm just trying to recover from the concussion.